What if the rosary you pray this Divine Mercy Sunday could carry 10 times more power than it does right now? Not because you change a single word, not because you add more mysteries, but because of something in the way you present yourself before God on that particular day that Saint Teresa of Jesus confirmed and that no one has ever explained to you. How many graces have you left on the table without even knowing it? How many Divine Mercy Sundays have you prayed the Rosary the same way you pray it on any other day, unaware that on that Sunday, heaven is waiting for something different from you? Something specific, something that Saint Teresa of Jesus described with a precision that takes your breath away. Today, that changes. Because Saint Teresa of Jesus did not speak about multiplying the power of prayer the way you'd make an empty promise. She lived it. She documented it. And there is something in her writings about interior disposition in moments of extraordinary grace that her Carmelite sisters applied for centuries without fanfare, without drawing attention to themselves. The way someone keeps a treasure hidden because they know exactly how much it's worth. That treasure has your name on it. What Saint Teresa of Jesus confirmed about the Rosary and Divine Mercy Sunday is about to change the way you pray, permanently. Write this in the comments right now. Jesus, I trust in you. Write it as the act of faith it truly is, because those words are the very heart of this Sunday. And subscribe to this channel right now by pressing the red button on your screen. Every week we bring you revelations from Saint Teresa of Jesus that you won't find anywhere else, and you don't want to miss what's coming. There is a moment in the Church's calendar that stands apart from every other. Not Christmas, though Christmas brings into the world the light that has upheld it since before time began. Not Good Friday, though Good Friday contains the deepest mystery the human soul can contemplate without breaking. It is the Sunday that closes the Easter octave, the 8th day after the resurrection, the day the Church calls Divine Mercy Sunday. And to understand why the Rosary prayed on that day carries a power that no other Sunday of the year can match, you first need to understand what that Sunday actually is, what it holds within it, what makes it unlike every other Sunday in the liturgical year. The Easter octave is, in the Church's liturgical tradition, an extension of the very day of the resurrection. The 8 days following Easter Sunday are not 8 separate days that simply stretch the joy of Easter the way you might extend a celebration out of habit. In the proper language of the liturgy, they are a single prolonged day, as though time itself had paused so that humanity could take in what happened at the empty tomb. The Church does not close Easter on Monday morning. She keeps it open, holds it burning, lets it blaze for 8 full days, because she knows that a mystery of that magnitude cannot be contained in 24 hours. And the last of those 8 days, the one that closes the octave, is Divine Mercy Sunday. This means something that almost no one stops to think about as deeply as it deserves. When you pray the Rosary that Sunday, you are not praying on an ordinary Sunday that follows Easter the way any week follows the one before. You are praying inside Easter itself. You are praying in the final heartbeat of that single extended day that began with the stone rolled away and the empty tomb. A day the Church has kept burning for 8 days so that no one arrives too late for what God has to give. Liturgical time is not decorative. It is not a poetic backdrop that the Church uses to make her celebrations more beautiful. Liturgical time is real. It acts on the soul that prays within it. And the soul that prays within it receives in a way that is entirely different from the soul that prays outside it. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this with a clarity that astonishes those who read her carefully. In the Way of Perfection, she writes about vocal prayer with an insistence that surprises readers who expect a mystic of her stature to speak only of contemplation and interior silence. Saint Teresa of Jesus defended vocal prayer with a passion that was, in truth, a defense of every prayer the Church places on the lips of her children, including the Rosary, including the Liturgy of the Hours, including every word that millions of Catholics pray from memory, without realizing that those same prayers, prayed with the soul awake, can open heaven in a way that no spiritual theory can fully explain. And when Saint Teresa of Jesus spoke of praying with the soul awake, she was not talking about a particular emotional state. She was not talking about feeling fervor or experiencing consolation during prayer. She was talking about something far more precise, far more accessible, and at the same time, far more demanding. She was talking about what she called recollection. Recollection is not concentration in the way we use that word today. It is not the mental effort of someone who grits their teeth and squeezes their eyes shut to keep from getting distracted during the Hail Mary. Recollection, in St. Teresa of Jesus' language, is the movement of the soul that voluntarily withdraws from everything that is not God in that moment and turns inward toward that center where God dwells and waits. And that movement, applied to the Rosary, transforms vocal prayer into something that is no longer purely vocal. It becomes prayer of the whole soul, prayer that rises because it comes from a true and honest place. Why does this matter, especially on Divine Mercy Sunday? Because on that Sunday, the Church offers to those who approach with a prepared soul and the established conditions the complete remission of all temporal punishment due for sin. Not some of it, not a portion proportional to the intensity of one's devotion, all of it. It is the same cleansing that the soul receives at baptism, when it is freed of every trace of the consequences of original and personal sin. And that extraordinary grace, that offer which has no equal anywhere else in the ordinary calendar of the year, is available to the soul that arrives with the conditions the Church establishes and with the interior disposition that Saint Teresa of Jesus described. The disposition her Carmelite sisters recognized immediately because they had seen it lived out in her before they ever read it on the page. The question that remains open is this: what exactly is that interior disposition Saint Teresa of Jesus described, and how does it apply to the Rosary you are going to pray this Sunday? Because it is not about adding extra prayers at the end. It is not about praying more slowly or with more emotion or with candles lit. It is about something that comes before the words, something that happens before you begin to move the first bead, something Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote down with a clarity that changes everything that comes after. That something has a name, and that name is going to change the way you kneel down this Sunday. Saint Teresa of Jesus wasn't a woman who spoke to hear herself talk or who wrote to impress anyone. Every word she put on paper cost her something. It cost hours of prayer. It cost the scrutiny of demanding confessors. It cost the review of theologians who read her pages first with suspicion and then with an astonishment they did not always know how to express without the pen trembling in their hand. When Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote about prayer, she wrote from inside prayer, not from the comfortable distance of someone who studies it without practicing it. And when she described the interior disposition the soul needs in order to pray with truth, she was not constructing a spiritual theory for the consumption of theologians. She was describing what she herself had lived, what she had seen working in her own sisters, and what she had seen fail when that interior preparation was missing, the preparation she considered non-negotiable. In the way of perfection, Saint Teresa of Jesus devotes entire chapters to defending something that, in her day, was almost provocative in certain spiritual circles. That vocal prayer, prayed with genuine attention and interior recollection, can lead the soul to the same heights as the most elevated contemplation. Her contemporaries tended to establish a rigid hierarchy between the two forms of prayer. Vocal prayer was for ordinary people, for those who had not yet reached the higher states of the spiritual life. Contemplation was for advanced mystics, for those who had already left words behind and were moving in pure silence. Saint Teresa of Jesus rejected that division with a firmness that sometimes caught her conversation partners off guard. For her, vocal prayer was not an inferior rung you needed to climb past as quickly as possible. It was a doorway just as legitimate and just as powerful as any other, as long as the soul praying knew what it was doing with its own words. And what is it that the soul needs to know? Saint Teresa of Jesus says it with a simplicity that throws you off precisely because you expect something more complicated. The soul needs to know with whom it is speaking. That is all. Before beginning any prayer, before opening the lips for the first word of the Creed or the Our Father or the Hail Mary, the soul needs to be conscious that it is not reciting a beautiful text into an empty room. It is speaking with a person. It is speaking with God. And God is present in that moment, listening in that moment, right there, in that particular room, before that particular person who holds the rosary between their fingers and the weight of their life in their heart. It sounds simple, and it is simple. But Saint Teresa of Jesus knew, with the wisdom of someone who had spent decades in prayer, that what is simple is not always easy to sustain, because the human soul has a powerful, nearly universal tendency to pray automatically, to let the lips move on their own while the mind travels toward the worries of the day, toward what needs to get done that afternoon, toward the conversation that was left unfinished, toward the pain that won't quite let up. Not out of bad faith, not out of lack of belief, but because the weight of daily life is real and does not stop when you kneel down, and the body's tiredness pulls the soul toward distraction with an ease that can feel humbling to anyone who confronts it honestly for the first time. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that struggle from the inside, not as an observer, but as the main character. She herself confessed in the book of her life that for years she prayed without that living awareness of God's presence that she would later recognize as the heart of all true prayer. Years of correct words without the soul fully present, and that confession, far from discouraging her, made her an extraordinarily compassionate teacher, because she taught from the experience of failure overcome, not from the comfort of someone who had never known it. And here, something that was left open earlier comes full circle. The question was what Divine Mercy Sunday has that other Sundays do not. The answer is not only in the plenary indulgence. It is not only in the extraordinary liturgical promise. It is not only in the objective grace the Church offers that day to all her children. It is also inseparably in the subjective disposition the soul brings to that encounter. Because the greatest grace in the world can pass right over a soul that is not awake to receive it, the way the heaviest rain passes over ground that has hardened and cannot absorb a drop. And the ordinary grace of any Sunday can transform an entire life when the soul receiving it is completely open, completely available, completely present before God. Saint Teresa of Jesus taught her sisters to prepare before praying with a gesture that cost no extra time but cost full attention. To stop for a moment before beginning, to breathe, to remember before whom they were standing, to acknowledge, even if only for a brief instant, that the God who created the universe and who rose from the dead was the same God waiting to hear their voice in that moment. That recognition, that act of interior awareness before the first word, was for Saint Teresa of Jesus the difference between a prayer that rises and a prayer that stays on the floor, wondering why. But there is something more that Saint Teresa of Jesus saw about the souls that most need that rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday. The souls who are not in this room, the souls who can no longer pray for themselves, the souls who are waiting for someone in this world to remember, this particular Sunday, that the mercy of God knows no boundaries between the living and those who have gone before us. There is a truth that popular devotion grasps instinctively, but that is rarely named with the clarity it deserves. Divine mercy, Sunday is not only a feast for the living, it is not only an opportunity for those still walking through this world to receive the indulgence, approach the sacraments, and renew their trust in the love of a God who never tires. It is also, and perhaps more urgently than we usually recognize, a day of extraordinary mercy for the souls in purgatory, for the souls who are waiting, for the souls who have completed their earthly journey and who now depend, in part, on what the living decide to do for them on the days of greatest grace in the liturgical year. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote about purgatory with an authority that came not from books, but from the direct experience of someone who had seen what she describes. In the book of her life and in the Foundations, she left testimony of visions in which she contemplated the state of specific souls. People she had known, sisters from her own convents, men and women who had asked her for prayer before they died, and who afterwards appeared to her in states she described with a sobriety and a precision that her confessors took very seriously. She did not speak of purgatory as a theological concept one must accept on faith even when it makes no sense. She spoke of it as a reality she had contemplated with the eyes of the soul, opened by a grace she herself recognized as extraordinary and entirely unmerited. What Saint Teresa of Jesus described about purgatory was not only suffering, though the suffering was real and present. It was above all waiting, an active, conscious waiting, entirely oriented toward God, with a love that can no longer waver or cool, because the will of those souls is fixed on Him forever. But a waiting that can be shortened or prolonged, lightened or extended, depending on what happens in this world, depending on the prayer of the living, depending on the rosary someone decides to pray on a Sunday of mercy with the name of a departed loved one written on their heart, like a debt of love that can still be paid. And here the tension becomes hard to sit with without acting. Because if the rosary on any ordinary Sunday can already reach the souls in purgatory with an effectiveness that the Church's tradition has always recognized, what can the Rosary of Divine Mercy Sunday accomplish? Prayed with the interior disposition Saint Teresa of Jesus taught, in that final heartbeat of the Easter octave, when God's mercy pours out over the world with a generosity that has no equal at any other moment of the liturgical year, the answer does not fit within human calculation. The mercy of God is not measured in the units we use to measure things of this world. But the Church, which does not speak in vain and does not establish feasts for decorative reasons, instituted that Sunday with a promise that saints and theologians have always understood as extending through the communion of saints to those who can no longer pray for themselves, but who remain members of the body of Christ. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood the communion of saints with a depth that few people have reached in the history of Catholic spirituality. For her, the separation between the living and those who have departed was not a real separation in the deepest sense. It was a difference of condition, not of belonging. Those in purgatory remain members of the same body. They remain connected to those who pray here. They continue to receive the benefit of every prayer someone offers for them with love and faith, even though they can no longer see who is praying or at what moment or with what words. That invisible connection, that current of grace flowing between the living and those waiting in purification, is just as real to Saint Teresa of Jesus as any other reality of the faith. And the Rosary is one of the most powerful and most direct channels through which that current flows and reaches those who need it most. When you pray the Rosary this Divine Mercy Sunday with a departed loved one in your heart, you are not making a sentimental gesture of remembrance. You are doing something with real consequences in a dimension your eyes cannot see, but which is just as real as the room you are sitting in. You are sending grace where grace can shorten a wait. You are building a bridge between this world and the next with the strongest material that exists, the mercy of God activated by the prayer of a soul that loves. Saint Teresa of Jesus did not leave behind explicit instructions for Divine Mercy Sunday, because that Sunday, with that name and that feast, came into the Church's calendar centuries after her death. But she left something worth more than a set of instructions. She left an understanding of the time of grace, of prayer that reaches farther than the eye can see, of mercy that recognizes none of the boundaries we place between the living and the dead. And that understanding, applied to this Sunday, to this rosary, to this moment in the year when heaven leans toward earth with unparalleled generosity, is exactly what you need to pray in a way you may never have prayed before. But we have not yet reached the heart of what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. There is still something missing, something she wrote in her own words about the power of vocal prayer when it rises from the right place inside us, something that changes not only how you pray, but what happens when you pray. There is a line from Saint Teresa of Jesus that her Carmelite sisters used to copy onto loose slips of paper and keep folded inside their prayer books. It was not a famous line. It was not one of the phrases preachers repeated from the pulpit, or one that theologians cited in their treatises to shore up their arguments. It was a phrase the Carmelites kept for themselves, quietly, the way someone keeps a small key that opens a large door. The phrase is in the way of perfection, and it says, with the direct simplicity that is the hallmark of Saint Teresa of Jesus when she speaks of what matters most to her, that whoever prays the Our Father with genuine attention is praying the highest contemplation, even without knowing it, even without feeling it, even without experiencing anything extraordinary during the prayer. That single line changes everything. Because if the Our Father prayed with genuine attention is the highest contemplation, then the Rosary prayed with that same attention, with that same awareness of God's presence, with that same interior disposition Saint Teresa of Jesus called recollection, is not a lesser prayer. It is not a devotional exercise for beginners who have not yet arrived at mental prayer. It is a prayer that can carry the soul to heights that many people spend years searching for along other paths without ever finding them. And Saint Teresa of Jesus does not say this as consolation for those who cannot do anything else. She says it as a declaration of something she herself verified, something she saw verified in her sisters, something she defended before theologians who wanted to persuade her that vocal prayer was an inferior rung to be left behind as quickly as possible. She did not leave it behind. She prayed the Rosary until the last day of her life. She moved the beads with the same hands that had written the interior castle and the way of perfection, the same hands that had held the pen during the most extraordinary revelations of her interior life. And those hands never let go of the Rosary, because Saint Teresa of Jesus knew that the Rosary prayed well is one of the most complete forms of prayer the Church has ever placed in the hands of her children. But what does it mean to pray it well, concretely, this Divine Mercy Sunday? Saint Teresa of Jesus describes in the way of perfection 3 dispositions of the soul that she considered necessary for vocal prayer to become what it has the capacity to be. They are not 3 steps in a technique. They are not 3 exercises to be performed in sequence. They are 3 attitudes of the soul that must be present simultaneously, like 3 flames that feed one another and together produce a light that none of them could produce alone. The first disposition is awareness of the presence of God. We have already touched on this, but Saint Teresa of Jesus returns to it again and again because she knows the soul tends to lose it the moment prayer begins. It is not enough to remember it at the start and then let it dissolve. You have to return to it every time the mind wanders, with the same calm with which you relight a candle the wind has blown out. No drama, no guilt, without interrupting the prayer, simply returning. Saint Teresa of Jesus called this continual returning the most fruitful exercise the soul can practice during vocal prayer. More fruitful, she said, than the emotional fervor that sometimes accompanies prayer and sometimes does not come at all. The second disposition is what Saint Teresa of Jesus calls seeking nothing of your own. In her language, this means arriving at prayer without an agenda, without the mental checklist of what you need God to take care of, without the quiet negotiation of someone who prays a rosary expecting that by the time the last bead of the final mystery is passed, God will have taken note of their needs and be preparing the appropriate response. Seeking nothing of your own does not mean having no petitions. Saint Teresa of Jesus had petitions constantly. She prayed for her sisters, for the church, for the souls in purgatory. But her petitions came from a soul that had first emptied itself of itself in order to be filled with God, not from a soul that arrived at prayer with a clenched fist, demanding what it felt it deserved. The third disposition is one that Saint Teresa of Jesus describes with an image you never forget once you have read it. She says that the soul that prays well must present itself before God like a beggar at a king's door, not with the kind of shame that paralyzes, not with a humiliation that crushes, but with the clean honesty of someone who knows exactly what they are, what they have, and what they need, and who does not try to hide any of it or dress it up, because they know the king behind that door already knows everything and loves them anyway. That honesty of the soul before God, that absence of pretense and disguise, is for Saint Teresa of Jesus the ground on which all true prayer is built. These three dispositions, applied to the Rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday, create something that has no precise name in any human language. They create a prayer that is simultaneously vocal and contemplative, personal and ecclesial, temporal and eternal. A prayer that enters the extraordinary time of grace of that Sunday with the soul completely open, and therefore receives with a capacity that a closed soul could never possess. And a prayer that leaves that room and reaches places the eyes cannot see. Souls who are waiting, situations that seem immovable, hearts that seem closed forever. But there is something in the Rosary itself, in its structure, in its mysteries, that Saint Teresa of Jesus contemplated in a way we have not yet named. Something that has to do with mercy, not as an abstract attribute of God, but as a concrete story, as a series of real moments that the Rosary moves through one by one, and that Divine Mercy Sunday illuminates with a light that no other day of the year can match. The Rosary is not a prayer that is said over the mysteries. It is a prayer that enters into them. There is an enormous difference between reciting the Hail Mary while thinking vaguely about the Annunciation and allowing the soul to descend into the interior of that moment, into the room in Nazareth, into the instant when a young woman named Mary heard a voice that would change her life and said yes without yet knowing everything that yes was going to cost her. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood the Rosary in that second way. For her, the mysteries were not labels identifying the stretch of prayer she happened to be praying. They were living realities, present and accessible to the soul that approached them with the right interior disposition. And each of those mysteries, from the Annunciation to the coronation of Our Lady, carries inscribed within it a dimension of mercy that Divine Mercy Sunday illuminates in a particular way, not because the mysteries themselves change depending on the day of the year they are prayed, but because the soul that prays them on that Sunday arrives at them with an openness that the extraordinary time of grace produces in those who have received it consciously. And that openness allows you to see in each mystery something that at another time might have gone unnoticed. Take the first joyful mystery, the Annunciation. God's mercy is at the heart of that moment with a depth that is not always perceived at first glance. God did not send an angel to a palace. He did not seek out a powerful, well-connected, influential woman who could efficiently manage what was coming. He sought a young, unknown girl in an obscure village and offered her the chance to participate in the greatest mystery in history. That is mercy, not the mercy that forgives a sin, but the mercy that chooses what is small, what appears insufficient, what the world would never have chosen, and makes it the center of everything. Saint Teresa of Jesus meditated on this mystery with a personal gratitude that came from having recognized herself in that same logic of God's, the logic that chooses what the world overlooks. Take the first sorrowful mystery, the agony in the garden. The mercy of God is here in a way that Saint Teresa of Jesus describes in the book of her life with a tenderness that is piercing. She writes that in her moments of greatest interior dryness, when prayer felt barren and God's silence weighed more than she knew how to bear, she returned to Christ in the Garden of Gethsemane. She returned to that moment when he too felt the weight of silence, when he too felt abandoned, when he too had to hold on to faith without the consolation that would have made everything easier. And in that return, she found something she could find nowhere else, the certainty that God does not ask of anyone what he himself has not first passed through. That is the mercy Divine Mercy Sunday celebrates, not only the mercy that forgives, also the mercy that accompanies. The mercy that descended to the very floor of human suffering so that no human being would ever have to suffer alone. The mercy that prayed in the garden with a sweat of blood so that you could pray in your room with the rosary in your hands, knowing that what you feel when you pray and the sky seems sealed has already been felt by someone who passed through it and came out the other side. Saint Teresa of Jesus prayed the sorrowful mysteries in a way her Carmelite sisters learned by watching her before she ever put it into words. She prayed them slowly, not because she had more time than anyone else, but because in each sorrowful mystery she found something that illuminated her own pain, her own dryness, her own hours of arid prayer in which the soul pressed on without feeling anything, without receiving consolation, without hearing the answer she was waiting for. And that illumination did not come to her by thinking about the mystery from outside. It came by going inside it, by letting the scene become present, by allowing Christ to be real in that moment and not merely a figure in a story that happened 2,000 years ago. The glorious mysteries carry the mercy of God to its fullest expression. The resurrection is not only the triumph of Christ over death, it is the definitive demonstration that God's mercy is greater than any failure, any sin, any situation that appears to be without a way out. Saint Teresa of Jesus wrote about the resurrection with a joy that her biographers describe as contagious, a joy that filled the whole convent on the days when she was meditating on this mystery, because it showed in her face, in the way she walked, in the way she spoke with her sisters. For her, the glorious mystery was not a historical memory. It was a present, active, living reality operating in the soul that contemplated it with faith. And Divine Mercy Sunday is in itself a glorious mystery. It is the Sunday on which the Church proclaims that the resurrection of Christ has concrete consequences for every soul that approaches Him with trust. Consequences that are not metaphors or promises for some distant future. They are real graces available now for the soul that arrives with the rosary in hand and the interior disposition Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. But there is still something left to discover. Why this particular Sunday may be the moment when someone close to you, someone who has drifted away, receives the grace you are going to pray for them. Saint Teresa of Jesus had a special devotion to the great sinners whom Christ forgave in the Gospels. She did not mention them in passing. She studied them. She meditated on them. She returned to them again and again the way you return to a well that always has water even when the rest of the landscape is dry. In the book of her life, she writes about Mary Magdalene with a familiarity that is striking, as though she knew her personally, as though she had spent hours in her company during prayer and had learned from her something that no theology textbook could have taught her. And what Saint Teresa of Jesus learned from Mary Magdalene has a direct connection to the rosary you are going to pray this Divine Mercy Sunday. Mary Magdalene did not come to Christ with clean hands. She came with the weight of a life that the world had judged without appeal. She came with the only argument she had, that she loved Him. and that love, which in the eyes of the world was worth nothing because of where it came from, was enough. More than enough. It was the only thing Christ asked of her, and the only thing she had to give. Saint Teresa of Jesus meditated on that moment with an emotion she herself describes as difficult to contain, because in that moment she saw something about the mercy of God that no theological argument could communicate with equal force. That God does not measure love by its origin, but by its depth. And there is someone in your life who needs you to know this Divine Mercy Sunday. Someone who walked away from the church, someone who stopped praying, someone who made choices that led them away from God, and who may no longer believe that a return is even possible for someone like them. Someone who has been away for years and has built a life in which God no longer seems to fit. Or so it looks from the outside. Saint Teresa of Jesus knew those souls. She encountered them on her travels, saw them in the towns she passed through while founding her convents, heard them confess their distance with a mixture of defiance and shame that she recognized immediately, because she had seen that same mixture in the mirror of her own interior life during the years when she too had lived far from the center. What Saint Teresa of Jesus says about those souls is not that we should pray for them with resignation, as though we're doing what we can, while privately assuming it probably won't do much good. What she says with the conviction of someone who has seen things the ordinary eye does not see is that the soul most far away is also the soul closest to an extraordinary conversion, when someone who loves them decides to pray for them at the moment of greatest available grace. Because the mercy of God does not work by the logic we use to calculate human odds. It works by its own logic, the logic of a love that refuses to accept loss as a final answer. The Rosary prayed for a lost soul on Divine Mercy. Sunday is one of the most powerful prayers a human being can offer, not because the Rosary has magical properties, not because that Sunday functions as an automatic amplifier for any petition, but because the combination of a prayer with the structure the Church has given it, prayed with the interior disposition Saint Teresa of Jesus taught, offered during the most extraordinary time of grace in the liturgical year for a soul the Church knows is in need of mercy, creates a petition that arrives before God with every element He Himself has established as the ordinary path of His grace. Saint Teresa of Jesus also meditated on the scene of the Samaritan woman at the well, a woman who had had 5 husbands, a woman whose situation made her invisible to the respectable people of her village, a woman who went to draw water at midday when no one else went, precisely so as not to run into anyone. And it was to her, the one who avoided social contact under the weight of her history, that Christ chose to reveal that He was the Messiah, to no one else in that moment, to her. Saint Teresa of Jesus meditated on that choice with a gratitude that came from understanding that God does not wait for the soul to be in the right condition before approaching it. God walks to the well while the soul is still carrying its jars and its shame. Your Rosary this Sunday may be the moment when God walks to the well for someone you have been hoping to see come back for years, not because you have earned it, not because you have prayed enough rosaries to merit that miracle, but because the mercy of God, activated by the prayer of someone who loves, reaches where arguments cannot reach, where conversations cannot reach, where even the best advice in the world cannot reach. And it reaches especially in the moments when the liturgical calendar opens a door that remains closed for the rest of the year. Saint Teresa of Jesus prayed for those who had drifted away with a persistence that her sisters remembered as one of the most striking features of her prayer life. She did not pray for them once and then hand the petition over to God with a pious detachment. She returned to them. She held them in prayer for days, for weeks, with the tenacity of someone who knows that the mercy of God never refuses a request made with genuine love. And Divine Mercy Sunday was, for this logic of persistent prayer, the moment of the year when the petition arrived with greatest force, because the time itself amplified it in a way that no other Sunday could match. But the Rosary that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught is not only individual praise. There is a dimension of the Rosary she lived in a way that her biographers mention almost in passing. Without realizing, they are naming something that multiplies its power in a way that goes beyond what a single voice can accomplish. There is something Saint Teresa of Jesus did not write about in her books as formal doctrine, but which she lived with a consistency that her biographers documented without quite grasping the full significance of what they were recording. There is something that happened in her convents when the Carmelites prayed the Rosary together, aloud, with the same shared intention, that did not happen when each one prayed it alone in the privacy of her cell. It was not that individual prayer was inferior. Saint Teresa of Jesus would never have said that. But there was something about prayer prayed in community, with voices joining in the same rhythm and the same love, that produced a resonance she herself described as different, as broader, as capable of reaching farther. The tradition of praying the Rosary as a family is not a devotional custom the Church invented to keep families together in the evenings, though that effect is real and valuable. It is a practice rooted in the deepest understanding of what communal prayer does in the spiritual realm. When two or more people pray together with the same intention and the same faith, they do not add their prayers arithmetically, they multiply them. Not because God keeps a tally of voices and gives more to whoever presents the most signatures on their petition, but because communal prayer expresses something about the Church that individual prayer cannot express on its own. That faith is not a private matter between the soul and God, but a bond that unites all believers in a single body, a body whose prayer carries a dignity and an effectiveness that surpasses the sum of its individual parts. Saint Teresa of Jesus founded her convents with that conviction as one of their most solid pillars. Her small communities, never more than 13 sisters, were not simply groups of women sharing a building and a schedule of prayer. They were, in her vision, units of prayer whose spiritual effectiveness depended on the interior unity among their members. A community that prayed together, that offered its intentions with a single heart, even though the voices were many, was for Saint Teresa of Jesus something qualitatively different from 13 women praying separately at the same time. The unity of intention, the convergence of souls toward the same point, created something she described in one of her most beautiful passages as a prayer that heaven cannot ignore. This has a direct application to the Rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday. If you pray the Rosary that Sunday as a family, with your spouse, with your children, with your mother, with whoever is in your home that day, you are doing something that goes beyond the sum of your individual prayers. You are building a unit of prayer that takes the shape of what Saint Teresa of Jesus described when she spoke of her communities. A small unit, perhaps just 2 or 3 people, perhaps imperfect, perhaps with voices that lose the rhythm, or with children who do not yet fully understand what they are doing, but a real unit, present, offered in faith, that Divine Mercy Sunday receives with a generosity that has no equal. And if you are alone, if there is no one else in your home that Sunday, if the circumstances of your life mean that the Rosary is a moment of solitude rather than community, Saint Teresa of Jesus has something to say to you as well. In the interior castle, she writes about the prayer of the soul that prays alone but knows she is not alone, because she prays within the Church, united to all who in that same moment are raising their voices anywhere in the world. That awareness of belonging, that understanding that one's own prayer is part of a greater prayer that never ceases, is also a form of communal prayer. It is the communion of saints operating in real time before death among those who are still walking through this world with the Rosary in their hands. On Divine Mercy Sunday, in thousands of different places across the world, there will be souls praying the Rosary with the same hope as you, petitioning for the same kinds of intentions as you. offering the same prayer in the same extraordinary time of grace. The simultaneity is not accidental, but it is the Church functioning as what she is, a body that prays, that intercedes, that holds its weaker members up with the prayer of its stronger ones, and that on that particular Sunday directs all its prayer toward the heart of a mercy that has no bottom. Saint Teresa of Jesus reached the end of her life with the same conviction she had carried from the beginning. Prayer is the way, not one of the ways, the way. And the Rosary, prayed with the interior disposition she taught, in the time of grace the Church offers, with the intention that love places in the heart of the one who prays, is one of the most complete expressions of that way the human soul has at its disposal. Not as a substitute for the sacraments, not as an alternative to deeper interior life, but as a faithful companion to all the rest. The prayer the soul can hold in its hands, even when it has nothing else, even when the body is worn out, and the mind is scattered and the heart is heavy with a weight it doesn't know how to name. We have not yet said the final word about what exactly happens when the Rosary is prayed on this Sunday with everything Saint Teresa of Jesus taught. There is still something left, something concrete, something you can carry with you on Sunday morning when you kneel down and take the beads in your hands and begin to pray in a way you may not have prayed before. The moment has come to say what has not yet been said, not because we saved the best for last as a storytelling strategy, but because everything that came before was necessary for what comes now to carry its full weight. You cannot build a house by starting with the roof. And what Saint Teresa of Jesus taught about the Rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday needed that foundation, that understanding of liturgical time, that clarity about interior disposition, that vision of the souls who are waiting and the distant ones who need it, that awareness of communal prayer that multiplies what a single voice cannot reach alone. All of that was the ground. What comes now is the act. The Rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday, prayed with everything Saint Teresa of Jesus taught, begins before the first bead. It begins with a moment that takes no longer than a single deep conscious breath, a moment in which the soul pauses, recognizes before whom it stands, remembers that on this Sunday, heaven has a door open that will not be open tomorrow, and decides to present itself at that door with completely empty hands, seeking nothing of its own, without the clenched fist of someone who is demanding, with the clean honesty of the beggar who knows exactly what they need, and who knows also that the King behind that door already knows them and loves them anyway. That moment of preparation is what Saint Teresa of Jesus called placing yourself in the presence of God. And it is not a formula. It is not an additional prayer to be added at the beginning of the Rosary. It is an interior act, silent, that can happen in the time it takes to make the sign of the cross, a recognition, a truth spoken without words, but with the full weight of the soul that speaks it. You are here, I am here, this is the moment, this is the door, and I arrive with everything I am and everything I am not, hiding neither. Then the creed begins, and the creed, in this context, is not the text that marks the start of the Rosary the way a bell marks the start of a class. It is a profession of faith that the soul makes with full awareness of what it is professing. I believe in God, the Father Almighty. On this Sunday, with this mercy available, with these intentions in the heart, with these souls in mind, I believe. Not out of habit, not out of custom. As an act of the will that chooses faith even when the body is tired, and the events of the week have not exactly made it easy to experience a God who is almighty and near. The mysteries are prayed in the way Saint Teresa of Jesus described, by entering into them, not by thinking about the mystery of the Annunciation while reciting the Hail Mary, but by letting the soul descend into that moment, into that room, into the presence of the angel before Mary, and finding there what it needs to find on that particular Sunday. Each mystery is a window. Saint Teresa of Jesus passed through those windows. She did not look at them from the outside. She leaned in and let what was on the other side look back at her. The intentions are offered between mysteries, briefly and deeply at the same time. You do not need a long list, just the name of the one you are carrying in your heart that Sunday. The departed soul who is waiting, the son or daughter who drifted away, the marriage that is struggling, the friend whose health isn't improving. The name placed before God with faith and with the awareness that on this Sunday, the mercy receiving it is the most generous mercy of the entire liturgical year. One intention offered with an open soul on Divine Mercy. Sunday is an intention that arrives before God with the full weight of what that day means in the economy of grace. At the end of the final mystery, Saint Teresa of Jesus recommended to her sisters a moment of silence, not an uncomfortable silence that has to be filled immediately with another prayer. A receptive silence, open, unhurried. The silence of the soul that has just prayed and now holds still to receive whatever God chooses to give. Not to hear voices or wait for extraordinary sensations, but to honor what has just taken place. To let the prayer rest in the soul the way water rests in the earth after rain, moving deeper than it seems from the outside, reaching farther than the eye can follow. That is the Rosary of Divine Mercy Sunday, according to Saint Teresa of Jesus. Not a technique, not a protocol, a way of standing before God that changes everything without changing a single word. The same beads, the same creed, the same Our Fathers, the same Hail Marys you prayed last Sunday and the Sunday before. But with a soul that this time knows before whom it stands, in what moment it stands, what is available to it that day, and what it can do with that for those who need it most. And that difference that seems interior and silent and almost invisible, is the difference between a prayer that stays at the ceiling and a prayer that reaches where it needs to go. Saint Teresa of Jesus confirmed something faith already knew, but which needed to be spoken with the clarity of someone who had lived it. That the Rosary prayed well at the right moment with an open soul and empty hands can move what nothing else in human power can move. This Sunday is that moment. This Rosary can be that prayer. You have made it to this point, not by accident, not simply because a YouTube algorithm brought you to this place. You arrived because there is something in your life that needed what Saint Teresa of Jesus left in writing, something your soul recognized from the first words, even before your mind could name exactly what it was. And now you know. You know that the Rosary on Divine Mercy Sunday is not the Rosary of any other Sunday. You know there is an interior disposition that transforms it without changing a single word. You know that the souls waiting in purgatory receive on that day with a capacity they do not have for the rest of the year. You know that the people who have drifted away, the ones you carry in your heart, may receive this Sunday the grace that no human conversation has been able to give them. And you know that all of this is available to you, to your hands, to your Rosary, to this Sunday that is no longer an ordinary Sunday. That is what Saint Teresa of Jesus confirmed, not in words written for this particular Sunday, because she did not know this feast by this name, but through an understanding of the time of grace, of prayer that presents itself before God with empty hands, of mercy without bottom or impossible condition, that makes everything she wrote point toward exactly this moment, as though her words had waited 4 centuries to reach your hands on the Sunday when you need them most. Pick up your Rosary this Sunday. Stop for a moment before the first bead. Remember before whom you stand and pray. Pray with everything you are and everything you are not, with the doubts and with the faith, with the tiredness and with the love, with the name of whoever you carry in your heart, and with the confidence that that name is already written in the mercy of God from before you knew you were going to pray for them. But there is something more that Saint Teresa of Jesus taught about prayer that does not end when the rosary ends. There's something about what happens afterward, about how to sustain what this Sunday has planted in the soul, about how to carry the mercy received beyond Sunday morning and let it become a way of living that transforms not only the moments of prayer, but all the other moments too. There are saints who understood this in ways that will surprise you. There are writings the Church has preserved for centuries that very few Catholics have ever read, because no one told them they existed or that they had something to say directly to them, to their lives, to their circumstances. There is a teaching waiting in the next video, a teaching that was born from the same heart of faith that produced everything you have just heard, and that will take you one step further inside what Saint Teresa of Jesus was wanting to show you from the moment you first began to listen. Don't let it go. What you received today was the beginning. The next step is waiting for you. May the divine mercy we celebrate this Sunday accompany you through every bead of your rosary. May the souls you pray for feel today the weight of your love turned into prayer. May the one who has drifted away find in the mercy of God the door they have been searching for without knowing they were looking for a door. Saint Teresa of Jesus, who prayed the rosary until the last day of her life and who knew what it meant to come before God with empty hands and a full heart, intercedes for you today and for every person you carry with you. May her prayer join yours this Sunday, and may the mercy of God, which has no measure, no condition, and no limit, do in your life what you alone could not do no matter how many years you tried. Until next time, with all the warmth in the world.